Crash landing of an Aeroflot Sukhoi Superjet 100-95 in Moscow. Crash landing of a Sukhoi Superjet 100-95 operated by Aeroflot at Moscow, Sheremetyevo, Russia, on May 5, 2019. The plane took off from Moscow for a passenger flight to Murmansk with 73 passengers and 5 crew members. Shortly after takeoff, the crew declared an emergency and elected to return landing at Moscow. The plane bounced upon landing, and a fire erupted as a result of a violent impact. 41 occupants were killed. 35 occupants were able to evacuate the aircraft emergency slides. The Fokker 100 operated by Aviation took off from Almaty, Kazakhstan for a passenger flight to Astana, Kazakhstan. 93 passengers and 5 crew members were on board. The plane lost height seconds after takeoff, impacted ground, broke through a fence and impacted a building. 12 people have been killed, and 12 people were seriously injured. 74 people survived with no or minor injuries. The aircraft has been destroyed. The aircraft was configured with flaps clean for departure. The takeoff run was normal. The aircraft lifted off, but had difficulty to gain height. The plane reached a maximum height of 20 feet. Rolled right to a bank angle of 5 degrees, rolled left to 18 degrees left bank angle and rolled right again to 14.5 degrees losing height. The plane contacted ground, striking its tail onto the runway, then climbed 6 feet, then descended to ground again, then climbed to 11 feet. The gear was retracted. The aircraft lost speed and made a final violent contact with the ground. The plane came to a stop 750 meters past the end of the runway. The captain was killed. The first officer has been seriously injured. It was the first flight of the day after a night stop. Due to weather condition, aircraft having parked overnight had accumulated ice. Before departing, the captain decided only the elevators were to be de-iced. The Kazakhstan Civil Aviation Authority has suspended Bakar's AOC Air operator's certificate pending the results of the investigation. The airline cannot fly anymore until the AOC is granted again. It was the first crash of the airline founded in 2011. It had a fleet of 10 Fokker 100, aged 27 years on average. Pakistan International Airlines Airbus A320-214 plane crash. Karachi, Pakistan on the 22nd of May 2020. The Airbus A320 operated by Pakistan International Airlines took off from Lahore, Pakistan, for a passenger flight to Karachi, Pakistan. 91 passengers and 8 crew members were on board. After a first aborted approach on to Karachi, the plane positioned for a second one, but crashed short of the runway in a residential area. 97 occupants were killed, and 2 passengers survived. 4 people on the ground were taken to hospitals with burns. During its first approach, the aircraft experienced problem with the extension of its landing gear. The plane touched down on the runway with retracted gear during their first approach, both CFM56 engines striking the asphalt, but then went around. Ground observers reported sparks from the aircraft when it touched the ground. The Airbus A320 climbed again and positioned for another approach, while on a left downwind. 5 minutes after go-round, the crew requested to turn left immediately, reporting they had lost both engines and declared a mayday. The RAT-RAM air turbine system proving electrical and hydraulic power the plane when both engines are lost deploy, as per design. The air traffic controllers cleared the plane to land. In a nose-up position, the aircraft stalled, then crashed in a residential area, 1350 meters 0.75 Van m short of the runway threshold, and burst into flames. 19 houses were damaged. The investigation confirms that during the first landing attempt, the landing gear was retracted. Marks on the runway suggest the engines may scrape the runway surface. The crew did not report any anomaly or emergency, as they should have done in the event of a landing gear failure. The airport therefore did not spread any foam on the runway in anticipation of a belly landing. Most likely the crew was not mentally prepared for a belly landing and went around when they realized the engines were scraping the runway. The engines may have been damaged when they scraped the ground. The aircraft had accumulated 124 hours in the 16 years since it was built in 2004. The aircraft had last been checked on March 21, 2020, and had flown 8 sectors since, The last sector before the accident flight was on May 21, 2020. Boeing 767 main landing gear collapses on landing. The Boeing 767-300 operated by Omni Air took off from Kabul, Afghanistan to Bucharest, Romania on August 28, 2020, but the landing did not go as expected. 49 passengers and 15 crew were on board. The Boeing 767-300 left main landing gear collapsed on landing. The aircraft was evacuated via slides. Nobody was injured. Juba Airways Fokker F-50 plane crash Mogadishu, Somalia, the 18th of July 2022. The Fokker 50 operated by Juba Airways took off from Baidoa, Somalia, for a passenger flight to Mogadishu, Somalia. A total of 36 passengers and crew members were on board. The plane flipped over on landing on Mogadishu's airport. The passengers and the crew were all rescued. The aircraft has been destroyed. During landing, the left-hand wing broke at the wing root and was left behind. The turboprop plane rolled inverted and came to rest next to the runway. The wing left behind burst into flames and was extinguished by firefighters. The Dutch aerospace firm Fokker originally manufactured the Fokker 50 aircraft but stopped production in 1996. The firm's successor company, Fokker Services, continues to service and repair those Fokker 50 planes that are still in use. DHL Boeing 757-27 APCF plane crash, San Jose, Costa Rica, on the 7th of April 2022. The Boeing 757-200 operated by DHL took off from San Jose, Costa Rica, for a cargo flight to Guatemala City, Guatemala. 2 crew members were on board. The plane was climbing out of San Jose's airport when the crew stopped the climb at about 21,000 feet due to a hydraulic failure. The Boeing 757 subsequently returned to San Jose's airport. After touchdown, the crew lost control of the aircraft and went off the runway. The aircraft broke in 2 parts. The crew exited the Boeing 757 uninjured. 45 minutes after departure, the aircraft returned for an approach to San Jose's airport. When the aircraft touched down, the crew deployed the thrust reversers to reduce the speed. Only the right thrust reverser deployed, thus creating a force pushing the aircraft to the right. The crew were initially able to counteract this force thanks to the rudder. However, as the aircraft was slowing down, the aerodynamical effect of the rudder was reducing. The crew then applied differential braking, thus braking on the left main landing gear, but the left main landing gear wheels got stuck and skidded. The video shows this moment as smoke come out from the landing gear. The Boeing 757 then spun around, went off the runway, crossed an airport road, and fell into a grass depression at the side of the road, causing the aircraft to break up into 2 parts. Both main gear struts collapsed. The Boeing 777-200, operated by United, experienced a right-hand engine failure minutes after it took off from Denver, USA, on February 20, 2021. The engine inlet separated, and numerous parts fell off in a residential area and damaged a number of homes. The aircraft stopped the climb at about 13,000 feet. The crew declared an emergency and returned to Denver. It finally safely landed about 23 minutes after departure. The flight was heading to Honolulu with 231 passengers and 10 crew members. The Boeing 777 was fitted with Pratt & Whitney PW4000 engines. There was no injury on board and on ground. The main deck cargo door of a Boeing 737 opens while flighting. August 21, 2021, this Boeing 737-200 cargo aircraft returned to land at MIT Airport in Columbia after its main deck cargo door opened shortly after takeoff. On board, there were no injuries. This incident involved a 40-year-old Boeing 737. LATAM Airlines Chile's Airbus A320-200 departed Lima, Peru for a passenger flight to Juliaca, Peru. There were 6 staff members and 102 passengers on board. As the jet prepared to take off, several fire trucks drove across the runway in front of it. The crew denied takeoff while traveling at a high rate of speed but was unable to avoid hitting one of the fire trucks. As a result of the right main gear collapsing, the right runway edge was approached by the aircraft. Immediately after the impact, the right engine caught fire. 4 passengers suffered critical injuries, while 36 people only had minor ones. All passengers were able to leave the flight. A third firefighter, who was riding in the truck, suffered critical injuries, leaving 2 firefighters dead. The rescue vehicle illegally entered the runway and struck the A320. According to the air traffic control, at about 1150 meters from the runway threshold, it crossed over onto the operational runway as flashing lights and sirens were sounding. The Airbus A320 was preparing to take off at that moment. The A320's right engine struck the fire truck at a ground speed of about 127 kts. The appropriate equipment broke down, sparking a fire. About 1,600 meters from the site of contact, the plane began to swerve and came to a stop on the runway. The Dassault Falcon 50 business jet operated by Air American Flight Services was substantially damaged when it overran the end of the runway during its landing at Greenville Downtown Airport, Greenville, South Carolina, USA. The plane took off from Clearwater, Florida, USA, for a passenger flight to Greenville. 2 passengers and 2 crew members were on board. The 2 crew members were fatally injured in the accident, and the 2 passengers received serious injuries. Air traffic control personnel reported that the airplane touched down normally at a normal touchdown point on runway. They saw the airplane's sole thrust reverser on the center number 2 engine deploy. The controllers then watched as the airplane did not decelerate as it continued down the runway. An airport security video captured the airplane's touchdown and confirmed that the no-to thrust reverser and the air brakes were deployed. The video also showed the airplane as it continued down to the end of the runway and then went over an embankment. First responders reported that all 3 engines were operating at full power for at least 20 minutes after the accident, with 1 engine running until about 40 minutes after the accident. Initial examination of the accident site, runway, and tire track evidence showed that the airplane departed the left edge of runway 19 near the departure end, traveled across the flat grassy area at the end of the runway, continued down a 50-foot embankment, and came to rest on the airport perimeter road about 425 feet from the runway. There was no fire. Fuel was observed leaking from the wings at the accident site. The nose landing gear was separated and found about midway down the embankment. The fuselage was separated immediately after the cockpit area. The crew was not appropriately qualified to fly this aircraft. The left seat pilot held an ATP certificate with a type rating for the Falcon 50 with a limitation for second in command only. The right seat pilot held a private pilot certificate with ratings for airplane single and multi-engine land. He did not hold an instrument rating. The plane performed the flight in IFR. The weather conditions were good at the time of the accident, with good visibility and low wind.